Hello and welcome everyone to the webinar entitled Finding, Developing, and Assessing Online Faculty. My name is Dave Clinefelter. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at the Learning House, and the Learning House is hosting this webinar. The Learning House is a organization that provides a variety of educational services to colleges and universities that want to develop online programs for their students. I was delighted when I was asked to lead this webinar, and I thought back over my career in education and how I've been involved with distance education in one form or another. I started my career as a public school administrator in the K-12 school system in Iowa, and Iowa was the first state in the union, and the only one to build a fiber optic network that connected every school district and every college in the state. That has just gone by the wayside with the advent of the internet, but we were delivering or sharing classes and faculty back and forth among school districts a number of years ago in Iowa. And then I had the good fortune to work at Graceland University, which offered in the first NLN accredited distance ed program in nursing, BSN completion program. We made the transition from mailing exams and assignments back and forth using U.S. mail when the internet came along to the internet. And in the past decade, I've worked at two large online universities. I use the phrase typically market-driven, sometimes synonymously with for-profit, but these market-driven for-profit institutions have grown very large, and it was out of developing best practices and procedures for developing and handling the faculty there that some of my thinking was shaped. So I'm anxious today to share ideas and experiences I picked up along the way about how we develop and manage our faculty in these online programs. This will be part of a series of webinars on a variety of topics related to developing the academic programs for online. So we'll start with the faculty, then we'll do one in a couple months on the curriculum and academic governance and operations issues. So over the every other month for the next few months, we'll be doing a series of these webinars. And so today, though, the key topic is how do we get good faculty? How do we develop them and keep them improving? If you are at your screen, obviously, we want you to invite you to ask questions or make comments throughout the presentation. I'm anxious to get feedback from people at several points in the presentation, hear your questions and comments, and as questions come in, I'll respond to those. So if you look at your technology, we're going to use the Q&A system and not the chat system today. So you can hover over the Q&A feature at the top of your screen and then submit a question anytime. There'll be times while I will invite you for particular comments and your feedback. So anxious to have you participate in that way, so feel free to send your ideas in. We're going to begin with the poll. We'll have a couple questions we're going to show you now, and I'd like to have you respond yes or no to this series of questions about famous people or famous awards that are given in the past year. So in just a second, you'll see the poll appear on your screen, and everybody's voting now. This is good. Take just a minute for you to respond, and then we'll give you the tallies. I have a few people that haven't answered yet. Take a minute if you would and respond until we get everybody in the poll. So let me share the results with you. This is pretty typical. I've done this several times with live sessions. And what we find is that only a small percentage of people are able to get these right. In your case, we're taking your word for it if you know who these folks were. It's interesting how these awards get a lot of attention, and they're in the newspapers and big headlines. Who won the Heisman, or who was the actress that won the Academy Award, or the Nobel Peace Prize. If I ask you the follow-on question, how many of you remembered who won this a year ago? The success rate drops way off. We only had about 20% of people who said yes to any one of these questions. The Heisman was 20%, 12% on the Nobel Peace Prize, and 17% on the Best Actress. Those numbers would drop into low single digits if I repeated with last year's award winners in these categories. Now, ask yourself if you can remember the name of a teacher who made a significant difference in your life. Everybody take a minute and think back through your educational career and get a picture of that teacher who made a big difference for you. When you ask that question, these people are not famous. They didn't win any awards, typically. They're not well known. They've never had their name in the newspaper. But everybody gets one or two names there in a group like this. In fact, people want to start talking about their third grade teacher, Mrs. Smith, and what she did in her class that made it so significant for them, and what the impact was that she had. Or people will talk about their freshman English professor in college and how she was able to inspire you to become a writer or to do something different with your life. Teachers, although they're not famous in many cases, they don't get these public awards, have a tremendous impact on us. We remember them throughout our lives, and they're people that we honor kind of in our mind. Same is true for online faculty. The act of teaching and the impact that teachers have can be the same in an online environment as it can in the face-to-face environments that many of us grew up in. So want to focus today on how we find those people, how we develop them and keep them improving, so that future students who can attend online but maybe aren't able to come to our campuses can have that same experience and that reward of interacting with great teachers. So think a little bit about what happened back in the 1920s when a new technology came along called the talkies. And silent movies were very popular from about 1890 to the late 1920s. In fact, the number one employment place for musicians back in those days was in theaters, because they would play pianos or have orchestras that would provide the background music live across America and the world. The new technology that you could add sound to film came along about 1925, 1926. And then in 1927, the first talkie was produced that got any kind of attention, and it was a movie called The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson as the lead. And within a few years, the silent movies were done, and everybody had switched to the talkies. The key thing to think about here is, what was the impact on those people who were the stars? You see Douglas Fairbanks and Norma Talmadge. They were very popular figures, highly paid entertainers in their day, but within a few years they faded, and they were stars no longer. Variety of reasons why some of these stars didn't make it across to the technological divide that happened there. Some had strange accents in their voices. Some had just low-quality voices that weren't pleasant or pleasing in the movie theaters. Others had different issues because the acting was different. You had to be more animated, a different style of acting in a silent movie than you could be more subtle in some ways in a talkie or where the voice was with it. But the same can be true, think about it, with this new technology of online learning. When the internet came into being and we had the development of learning management systems, now you could connect students from around the world or many different locations and geographies with the faculty members, so nobody was in the same time and place. Kind of the reverse technology here, where we're all used to using our voices in the classroom face-to-face, and now you don't have a voice in many cases. We do have tools that permit you to do webinars and seminars like we're doing today where one person can speak, and probably in the next few years we'll see developments where students and faculty can all speak together, so the voice may come back into play. But for now, the technology kind of went the other way, and it takes a different skill set, just like it did for these silent movie actors and actresses. In the online classroom, you don't have large chunks of time where the faculty member is talking in a large group activity. It's typically small, one-on-one, or tightly constructed interactions, usually with text, sometimes with voice, between students and faculty members. So the faculty member has a different task, a different skill set to be really effective in this environment. I wish I could remember the person that coined the term with-itness. My field is education. There was a professor in a book I read years ago that said some of the best teachers have this concept that he defined as with-itness. That in a classroom setting, some teachers were with it. They could understand what was happening. They could sense the relationship with the students, the tone, the style, and make the right decision at the right time to keep that class as a group moving forward. Well, that kind of with-itness doesn't work in an online environment, but I think there's a different kind of with-itness to be really with it in an online classroom. And just the opposite, too, in terms of speaking voices. I've known people that weren't great lecturers, or they weren't good speakers, had certain kinds of speech handicaps. The technology works way to their benefit because now they can be great when it's text-based and their voice doesn't become a handicap or a hindrance to them. So a couple things to think about as we move forward into this discussion. Before we really get to the issue of what are quality online faculty members, as you build your programs and develop online classrooms, a couple basic questions I think we need to think about: the composition of your faculty and then the expectations for your faculty. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about those. So the composition question really is, what percentage of your faculty do you want to be part-time versus full-time? And I've worked in institutions that went all the way up to 90% part-time faculty members to some that only had 5 or 6% part-time faculty members. But in the online world, you have a choice there, and you can hire either full-timers or part-timers, but it's important to think through what are the pros and cons. So just a few points about this. In general, you can see from the slide here, across all institutions, whether they're online or face-to-face traditional type institutions, the percentage of part-time faculty is rising dramatically. So that right now in the U.S., about 50-50 across all of higher education. I could put a similar slide up here that looks very similar in terms of the data trend with females versus males. The females are rapidly approaching the 50% mark. And in my experience in the online world, online faculty tend to be more part-time, even greater than the number you see here, and a higher percentage of them tend to be women. So that's the background or kind of the status of part-time faculty today. But a couple things about the pros and cons to think about as you make this decision about what the composition of your faculty would be. First one's price. The average full-time faculty member now in the United States, with benefits and everything added in, is about $80,000 a year. Part-time faculty salaries range typically between $2,000 and $4,000, depending upon their level of training, if they have PhDs or not, the fields that they're in, whether it's a graduate course, but that's a typical number. So if you multiply a typical load of 8 classes a year, even times the high end, that's $4,000 per class, that's less than half the price of a full-time faculty member. So that's a consideration to think about. Now, some institutions change the load structure. In an online class, they assume that there's actually less work for a faculty member depending on how you do course design. If the faculty member is not expected to actually create and design the course, but just teach the course, then you can make the case that they could teach more than 8 a year, so those numbers can go up. But it still gets very difficult. You have to add a lot of classes at $4,000 a piece to equal a full-time salary. So that's a key consideration to think about. Another one is expertise or the credentials of the faculty members. And in my experience, the part-time people can help an institution get more highly credentialed faculty members for specialties. Even a large department where faculty members are teaching several classes each semester, or a large university that has multiple sections of those classes, typically a faculty member has to be prepared for several different classes or different preps each semester and then sometimes year over year. So it forces faculty members to be more generalist, where they may have to teach U.S. history, European history, and American government, for example. If you use part-time people, you could find people with specific credentials, doctoral degrees in each one of those fields. So you get a European historian, a U.S. historian, and somebody who's a specialist in U.S. government. I was actually visiting one of the Learning Health Partner institutions last week, and the department chair of a program there was actually planning on using part-time faculty members in an online class for campus-based students. This was a small town that was away from metropolitan areas. They had a difficult time finding specialized faculty, but in a sense they were going to use online to import faculty expertise for their campus-based students. It's an interesting kind of twist on that whole concept. Teaching quality. In my experience, and where I've worked, we've run several studies comparing performance of full-time and part-time faculty members. There's no significant difference on measures like student satisfaction or student retention or student grades. So I think the quality of part-time faculty can be very good in the classroom. When you think about that, it makes sense because they're typically trained the same way or have certain selection criteria that apply. So the part-timers come through the same process as full-timers do. There's 3 categories of people that typically make up your part-time faculty members. One is retired professors, or professors that maybe are moonlighting, a subset of that group. But many retired professors, fully tenured from a variety of kinds of institutions, want to keep working in a part-time way. They want to maybe live in a nice location like Florida, but in the online world, they can continue to work. So it's a great source of talent to bring in to supplement your faculty with. A second group is professionals that like to teach, people that are practitioners in the workplace, and they enjoy the interaction with students and the challenge of teaching, sharing something that they know and that they're expert at. And that's a great source, again, of people that really have hands-on knowledge to enrich the classroom. And again, a subset of that group is women who are stay-at-home moms or have taken some time out of the workplace to raise families. These are people, again, that have good credentials and they're great experience in a variety of professions, but now they want to work part-time for a while. And online gives them the flexibility to teach kind of around their schedule, just like it gives students the flexibility to attend class when they need to or work around their schedules. So that's why I think why we see such a high percentage of females in the online part-time faculty world, and it's a great source of talent. And then finally, there's people that are just full-time adjuncts. They make a career and a living of being an adjunct professor. And online really facilitates those people because they don't have to drive back and forth between campuses. They don't have to live in a metropolitan area that has a number of institutions within driving distance, but they can live anywhere and they can teach full-time online, maybe for 2 or 3 institutions simultaneously. Oftentimes you get good faculty members who are place-bound because of a spouse's employment, and they have to live in a certain place because of their spouse, but they also want to continue to work themselves, so they make a career of being an adjunct. These people often have taught on multiple learning management systems or platforms, and lots of experience at handling the technology, so they can be a good source. So 3 different types of people you get in the adjunct world, and they can all be good to add to your faculty, I think. Finally, there's the question of service to the university. And here I think full-time people kind of have the advantage because they're there, they're accessible, it's typically considered part of their load. Although, again, in my experience, I've had part-time faculty members serve on faculty senates and faculty curriculum committees, and they do wonderful work there. In many cases, you would want to do a stipend of some type if it's a major service requirement, but many are willing to volunteer for minor kinds of assignments as well, and they can contribute quite a bit to the overall life of the university. We got a question that came in here. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, here's a person that added a comment. You found adjuncts are more willing to consider course design standards. If I understand the question right, I think if you have expectations, which I'm going to talk about next, for your faculty in terms of course design, the adjunct people are, in my experience, are more willing to take direction or fit into a system like that the university has, whether it's course design or other kinds of expectations for the institution. Let's talk about expectations here a little bit. So I broke them down to a couple different categories that I think are areas to keep in mind. And as you develop an online program, if you're an academic leader, you get the great opportunity to kind of create a new culture or a new set of expectations, a new style of faculty behavior, faculty operations, faculty performance. So one thing to think about is load. As I mentioned earlier, you can make a case that if the faculty member does not need to design the course and create the course, they don't have to design examination rubrics and tests and pick textbooks and so forth, that there's less work than a class where you're responsible for all of that if you're just teaching the class. And so the considerations to think about, if you have full-time people, what the load is. And for part-time people, oftentimes there's a limit that you need to set for legal reasons because you don't want that person to cross and become considered a full-time faculty member eligible for benefits and so forth. So it's important to pay attention to the number of courses that you assign to a part-time person. And again, in my experience, many of the part-time adjuncts are dedicated to one institution. They become really permanent members of the faculty even though they're part-time. They may teach many, many years for the same institution and become kind of vested regular faculty members, but you have to pay attention to not assign them so many classes that they cross the threshold to become full-time legal employees. Compensation, as I said, for your part-time people is something to keep in mind. It's typically $2,000 to $4,000. And my advice is there's 2 ways to set compensation for online classes. One is to have a set rate for the class. If it's not a full-time person where it's part of their load, you set a rate of maybe $2,000 for a class size of 10 to 20. And it's important to put the class size and that range on the number of students with the payment. Because then you have the question of what if a class doesn't make? If you have a minimum size class of 10 students, then what if the class only gets 6 students enrolled in it? So in addition to having the scale for a flat rate of $2,000, say for a class of 10 to 20, I recommend that you add to that a per pupil rate, so that if it drops below the minimum for the class to make, you can still run the class if it's important, but you pay the faculty member, for example, $200 a student, and it doesn't become a financial drain on the institution. Likewise, if you go above that limit, say if the upper limit is 20 and 23 students enroll, it doesn't make sense to split that into 2 sections, but you pay 3 times 200, an extra $600 to that faculty member for the overload, so to speak. And it's a good way to balance that compensation question so it's fair
We have
for
a
the
couple
individual.
of questions that have come up about compensation.
Okay.
From Barb Hall, are there IRS requirements to determine who is a contractor, 1099 versus part-time employee with a W-2?
Yeah, there are legal requirements when you have to consider a person full-time. It gets to I think it's people that hit 37.5 hours on the federal guidelines become full-time employees, so they're eligible for all the benefits and so forth. I don't know exactly what those are. I'm not an HR specialist, but there's a number there. And you need to kind of equate what's the hours of time to teach an online class, and if you would consider that's 10 hours a week, for example, you have a limit on how many courses you can assign that person before they become. So it's a good item to discuss, Barb, with your HR department. Maybe I have to consult legal to see what the limits are. And there may be some state issues here as well as the federal guidelines to pay attention to. But there clearly are limits, and you don't want to exceed those limits, or the part-time person legally has a claim to benefits and other continuous employment and so forth.
And then we have another question from Linda about compensation. Do you recommend a higher rate of pay for online versus face-to-face courses?
I don't. I've worked with a number of institutions. We have partners here at the Learning House that pay more or less, but the standard seems to be to pay the same for a face-to-face class as an online class. And again, though, I said if you make there's a key decision there about whether or not the faculty member designs and creates and builds the class, which is a lot more work than just teaching the class. And so, for full-time people, you have that consideration of what's the load. For part-time people, my experience is they all pay them the same rate, even if they're designing the class. But you would take that into consideration. Oftentimes, if you ask a person to design a course, they get paid a stipend to do that, and then the course is ready, other people could teach that, you pay them a separate stipend for teaching it. But right now, the norm seems to be same pay for a class, whether it's online or face-to-face. Moving on down to continuous development. I think it's important to set expectations early on when you're setting up your program and starting to hire your faculty, if you expect them to go through developmental activities. Clearly, one of the most obvious ones is an orientation program prior to teaching their first class. But there's ongoing development in this field. It's a new field. There's research coming out all the time about best teaching practices, and there's new technology coming off the line on a regular basis, different features to LMSs or different tactics or tools that faculty members can use in their class to do podcasts, video recordings, all kinds of things that you can do. So I think it's important to set expectations for continuous development. This is an area that's changing rapidly. To stay up to speed and stay current, faculty need to keep developing. There are some states, too, that require kind of documentation of ongoing faculty development. So in my experience, it's not uncommon to have an expectation of say, faculty members would go through 8 hours or a certain number of hours of ongoing continuing development each year that they work at the institution. That could be a series of workshops or classes that they take, either from the institution or from professional associations. Course features. Question?
There is a question. There's
okay,
another
question
from Barb Hall. What are your thoughts about offering small stipends to even part-time faculty to engage in professional development, similar to the stipends allotted to full-time faculty?
It's a good question. If the stipend is for them to attend conferences and programs and so forth, I mean, if they're part of your faculty, especially if they're a regular person who's kind of long-term with you, you want them to develop as well. But there's also the consideration if you require people to go for training, like if you require people to do an orientation program before they teach, should you compensate them for that? And there's different legal definitions on it. Some people think, or some HR departments have interpreted that you need to pay them, you're obligated to pay them if you've hired them in a sense and haven't assigned them their first class yet. Other institutions interpret that differently. But if you're going to expect people to give a significant amount of their time to go through developmental activities, You got to make a decision locally if you think you should pay those people, or if it's a condition they just have to do it in a sense to keep their assignment or keep their job. Course features. So whether or not you have faculty build the courses, either way, there are certain things that institution probably wants to set as standard features for their courses. For example, the obvious one is the syllabus. You would expect every faculty member to develop a syllabus for their class and to post it in the classroom. Some universities give more latitude to what's in those syllabi, and other ones have kind of set templates that you would follow. But either way, there's probably some discretion for the faculty member to decide certain things that they want in that syllabus, especially their availability if office hours are part of the requirement or expectation. Other things would include plagiarism, how we're going to handle plagiarism, what's the policy in this classroom or the university policy that comes through on how to handle plagiarism. It's not uncommon for expectation to be that a faculty member goes in before the class starts and posts an introduction and a welcome, background about them. I've had debates over whether or not we should allow them to put a picture up. You know, one debate is, well, a picture makes it more personal, but then there's legal issues about, you know, what could be done with that picture and could it be shared, and some faculty may be hesitant to put up pictures actually. But I would opt on the side of more personalization. It's good for faculty members to all introduce themselves to the class, give some background and a welcome to their students. Another common feature that you may set as an expectation is that at the end of each lesson or module or week, depending how the courses are constructed, that the faculty member does some kind of summary. Here's what we learned this week, here's some takeaways, and here's what's coming up next week. So you can think about features like that that you want all your classes to have if you think it's part of a good quality student experience, and set those expectations so faculty know what they are, they're trained to do it, and they feel comfortable with it. The last two are the big ones, though. Timeliness and quality interaction. So let's spend a little bit more time on each of those. Timeliness, there's three areas that I want you to think about that we would normally expect people to perform in. The first one is discussion forum participation. It's typically in the institutions where I've worked required that faculty members be in the discussion forum 4 or 5 days a week. And in a sense, you think about face-to-face faculty on a campus situation, they know what the expectation is. Class meets every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 11 o'clock, so they're supposed to be there. But when there's not a class session, what are the expectations for class participation or class attendance, in a sense, for the faculty members in an online class? And the discussion forum, in many ways, replaces the class meeting of a face-to-face class. It's where the faculty member interacts with students and shares their knowledge, their expertise, answers student questions, probes student learning, and it's a key part of that activity. So setting expectations is important. Why frequently? Why not just once a week? I've had faculty argue or debate over, well, the quantity is not as important as the quality. You know, if I give really good feedback to students once a week is enough. And my response is it's not an either-or question. You want frequency and quality, and that's a much better student experience. You can think about it. There are things that happen in that classroom where students may be in a discussion back and forth with one another, and they may get off track. They may be going down a whole line of thinking that's inaccurate or inappropriate. So if the faculty member's checking on a regular basis, they can redirect that discussion, kind of get the students back where they need to go. Sometimes there's conflict between students in an online class, and they misbehave in very inappropriate ways. And if the faculty member's only in there once a week, that could really get out of hand quickly. So they need to be checking it and seeing what's happening on the discussion board and monitoring that and taking corrective action if needed. More importantly, there are teaching moments that happen on that discussion board. A certain student makes a comment or posts a response, another student reacts to it, and there can be great opportunities for the faculty members to clarify the student thinking, to extend the student thinking, to really use that teachable moment to make a great point. And if they're not there frequently, they'll miss a lot of those kinds of opportunities. So 4 or 5 days a week is pretty typical. Maybe once on the weekend. Grading within 7 days of the due date is what I would recommend. Most of the online classes are set up to run week by week. There's new sets of assignments each week, new outcomes or activities, new part of the course. So think about it, if there's a quiz 1 week and the course is designed sequentially to build from week to week, if that student doesn't get the feedback from week 2, for example, until the end of week 4 or 5, it really distorts the learning and it's not effective and helpful for them. So timely feedback to their work helps them know what they got right, what they need to work on before they move too far and build onto the next part of the course. And then email messaging. Most LMSs have a messaging system within the LMS, and it's much more beneficial for the faculty members to use that as a source of one-on-one communication with students. I strongly urge you not to have faculty members use personal email or even university email, but to use the messaging system within the classroom because it's trackable and it's recordable. You can use it to follow up with faculty. But there's also lots of legal issues that can come up here. I've run into a number of cases where students may accuse faculty members of certain things or vice versa, and if you can't track that messaging down, it's difficult to know what's happened there. It's just much safer and easier and I think better in many ways to keep that messaging within the classroom LMS so you have a record of it. And the question here is do you have office hours? Some faculty or some institutions expect faculty to have office hours. I think the office hours are not as appropriate for these kind of students, but a messaging system works really well. But again, timeliness is important here. So 24 hours, 48 hours on the weekends is pretty common practice to expect faculty to respond to students. They have questions, especially adult students. They don't want to wait for 3 or 4 days to get an answer to that. It may stop where they are in their progress in the course.
We've had a question come up from text. What have you seen with holidays like Thanksgiving and Easter regarding faculty contact and availability? We have online courses that are happening over those holiday weekends.
Yeah, that's a great point. If those are official holidays of the university, then you don't expect behavior and activity on those days. So you just treat it like you would a face-to-face class in that regard. Sometimes you have to watch when the end and start of a semester happens, or if a class runs over spring break, you just, in a sense, not expect any activity that week. And that's usually the way it's handled, Ted, in my experience. So let's move on then to the last one. I want to get some interaction from you folks on a couple of these. So this is a way that you can normally track. This is an example of a school that has a report on faculty behavior. The blue bars there indicate how many times a faculty member did something in the class that particular day. So you can see week by week where the activity was, what days it were. And you can get these reports that summarize this activity. So if you have 20 people teaching in your department, you get a report like this out of most LMSs that show, of those 20 people, each week, how many of them were on there 4 days, 5 days, 3 days. If you have an issue, it pops up. In the market-driven institutions where I've worked, every supervisor, every department here would get this report every week, and they would know if there was a faculty member who was absent or not hitting the targets for that particular week, and you could have a conversation with them about what happened. So the last one is quality, expectations on quality. Let me just give you a couple of examples here. Here's an assignment that came in. This is in an online class, actually teaching faculty to teach online. And take just a second to skim through this. And this is the kind of response that you would say it's not helpful. It's not really extending the learning or helping that student dig into what the issues are, to just say nice work. This is all too often you see a response like this, and it's a weak one. It's one that doesn't really help the faculty member. The next slide will show you it's the same assignment in another class. It's a fairly long post here, so kind of skim through it. this student has a different way to handle community interaction or building community in an online class. And then we'll show you another response from a different instructor this time. This person says, what do you think are some of these indicators of solid community? What sort of behaviors would you see? So a few questions, timely questions, appropriate questions, extend that learning and help a student dig deeper into it. This is the kind of thing that's more helpful, and it helps that student maybe consider alternative points of view and so forth. So here's a couple more examples of things why you want to set standards on quality. Here's a comment that I saw in a discussion forum. Now the issue here is this doesn't need to be in a public forum where all the other students can read it. This is a good example where use the email or the messaging system to help this student get more timely on their post, for example. Okay, another one. This is interesting, an assignment, read a particular reading out of the textbook, it looks like, and the student, obviously, we won't show you the student comment, but the student didn't get it very well. This is an example where the instructor can teach this student with the timely comments and appropriate comments on what they missed or what they should have considered, get them started, give an example, maybe scale the question back a little bit. This is the difference between that silent movie star and the talkie. We switch from that kind of large group, maybe lecture presentation to working. This is the skill set that we're looking for, is people that can kind of get inside that student's mind and help them move it along. It's really working one-on-one with many students simultaneously. One more example.
Okay.
Question?
And then we have a comment and question after your next example.
So here's an assignment. It's an accounting class, and answer 4 or 5 key questions here. And again, you don't have to get the details of the content, but look at the response. 4 different students, were on that discussion forum, and basically the faculty member gave the same comment to all 4 students. Even saw an example, unfortunately, not long ago, where they were identical. The faculty member copied and pasted the same comment to multiple students on the same message board or discussion forum. This is a great example where the instructor can say, hey class, we're all missing this point. Send an email to the entire class kind of clarifying what's going on here and getting them all on target rather than hitting each student individually with the same comment. So there's a variety of things like this that are made for best behavior. We don't have time here to go to all these. We need to keep moving on, but you get the idea, I think. What's the comment?
So Charlie commented, as faculty, you must engage the learners into the classroom and interact with each student. Engagement is the key for the instructor to get the students involved.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlie. It's amazing how I've talked to some faculty members that have even said things like, I just don't think it's my responsibility to be there, and it inhibits the student discussion. If I comment too much on the discussion board, the students don't comment. Well, just the opposite is true. You see indicators when the faculty are highly participating on the discussion board, the students respond in kind, and it stimulates that discussion and it creates a much better learning environment.
And then we have a good question. How do faculty chairs at various institutions assess interactions of online faculty? After all, they cannot review every instructor response.
Great question. We're going to get to that. If you'll hold that one, we're going to get to that in just a minute on supervision, and we'll clearly address that. Let's go on to the next topic, then, recruiting. I'm surprised that in the institutions I've worked with here, our partners, that some of them have this question. We don't think we can find faculty. Because in my experience in these market-driven institutions, they're inundated with faculty. Faculty are just pouring in wanting to teach for these institutions. It almost creates a problem for the HR department just to be screening out. So the recruiting for online faculty is no different than your face-to-face faculty. If you advertise on one of these websites that are pretty common for part-time or full-time online people, you get the same set of resumes in, do your same process to sort through those resumes. Maybe you have a search committee that does a telephone interview, especially for full-time people, and then you move into an interview on campus. Do the same process, and it works the same way. One thing that I would say is different, and that is for online faculty, it's tough to get a teaching demonstration. Many universities, when they invite candidates to campus, have them as part of that day-long interview do a teaching presentation. And what do you do with an online faculty member? Well, I think you can do the same kind of thing with the lessons I just showed you. Give them 4 or 5 student comments on a message board and see how they respond. Let them craft their responses. So you can, in a sense, do a version of a teaching demo even for online faculty, and it works quite well. So moving on, then, next topic is faculty development. And I think it's important that you have a source or somebody on the institution responsible for faculty development. Most of the institutions that I know of that do any kind of online programming develop a center for faculty development. They call it different things. Here's some examples from some public universities and private, their versions of this. You can go to any of these universities and get a look at their faculty development center, the kinds of programs that they do there. The couple things to think about when you do this. In terms of staffing, you need somebody to be in charge, and I highly recommend an advisory board. Get faculty members, both part-timers and full-timers, to serve on an advisory board, and they can be very helpful in picking programs and setting priorities, as well as doing presentations themselves. So a group of faculty members know what they need and what they want, what would be helpful to them. They're great people to use in that capacity. And then, in my experience, there's 3 things that you need to kind of manage a good center for teaching and learning or faculty development. A website where you can communicate with people, where they can come and find archives of old materials or previous training programs, where they can get the news about new things, and where they can sign up. Some type of learning management system. Often you use the one that you use with your students, makes sense. And then a registration system. If you get any kind of volume, you need some way to automate who signs up and track and record who attended, who didn't attend, and so forth. Your normal student information system won't work very well for faculty and short-term programs like this. So there's several that are commercial products that are available there. But if you do this manually, it doesn't take long before you spend a lot of time kind of tracking who attended, who was registered, and so forth. So here's some
We have a couple of comments back on evaluating potential online faculty. Barb mentioned that WebEx and Adobe Connect and similar tools can be real helpful in interviewing remote faculty. And Maria mentioned that by promoting adjunct faculty into, I think it's face-to-face roles for remote faculty, or full-time faculty roles for remote faculty, you do not need to worry about obtaining a teaching demonstration as you've already seen the quality of their work.
Those are 2 very good points. In my experience, where you have a number of part-time faculty, some of them want full-time positions, and so if you have vacancies for full-time people, typically you get those out of the ranks of your part-time people, and they move up, and you've already had a chance to work with them and see how well they do, and you can kind of pick the best of your part-timers. It's a good strategy. So some of the programs that you run through a Center for Faculty Development, here's an example of orientation. I highly recommend that you have an orientation program for all new faculty, that they go through it and get trained on the kind of expectations that we've talked about, how to lead a good discussion board, practices and procedures from your university and college, the values of the institution. So these are the kind of topics that we cover at the Learning House in the foundations that we use as an orientation program for our faculty. Here's some other examples, the kinds of things you can do. You're really limited to the creativity of your faculty on the advisory group and the leader, but I've seen all these kinds of programs work well. Interesting, even the brown bag discussions. You remember faculty off there by themselves teaching, from home offices. The chance to have a lunchtime conversation with colleagues over a book or an article that you all read can be very stimulating for those folks. And don't discount faculty meetings. The meetings themselves are a great source of development. So a variety of things that you can consider. Here's some examples in the next slide. The technology track there are tutorials that are just kind of self-paced tutorials. Kaplan has a nice online conference called KU Village that's offered once a year in the fall. The Learning House has a conference, it's a live conference in Louisville each summer in July. So a variety of kinds of programs you can find like this.
And we have another comment, actually. It seems to make sense that a university should have separate orientations or faculty who have online experience at other institutions and faculty who are new to online instruction altogether. The experienced online instructor just needs orientation to that particular institution.
That's a good point. That comes up frequently. Some faculty say, well, I'm a veteran online faculty member. I don't want to go through your orientation. How do you know that? And do they fit your expectations? If you have particular expectations for classroom features or policies on plagiarism and things that you want to go through, I'm not real sympathetic to faculty skipping the orientation, even if they've got a lot of experience, because it's a good refresher for them in many cases, and much of it could be unique to your institution, too. But it's a good point. So here's some professional associations. No university has to do this all by themselves. Sloan C, WCET, and Quality Matters are all really nice professional associations. They have a variety of training programs and conferences that can really supplement what you do with your faculty on your campus. So let's move into the final topic here that I wanted to cover, and the question came up earlier about this, and it's really about supervision. I think the final piece of a good faculty development program is good supervision. So we're going to talk about three aspects of this. The first one is mentors, and this picture doesn't quite do justice to it, but it gets the feeling of colleagues working together. It's common practice in the market-driven institutions to assign a senior faculty member as a mentor to a new person teaching at that institution for the first time. It's great if they can both be teaching the same class, if the university is big enough to offer similar sections or out of the same discipline. This is a good use of senior part-time people or full-time people as service assignments, or those veterans that have retired from other universities, so they can be great mentors to new people coming into your institution. And it's important to set up standards and kind of expectations here, though. Typically, the mentor will view the mentee's classroom before the term starts to make sure it's all set up according to the expectations of the institution, and give feedback to them. And then typically a weekly meeting where the mentor will observe some of the discussion board activity, maybe with the first assignment that's given, go through the grading that the mentee has done to give them coaching and guidance and help them norm in. Another great feature is for the mentor to give access to their class that they're teaching to the mentee. So the mentee can watch them and observe their message board, see how they handle particular questions. And it's a great learning cycle when you could observe someone else, reflect on it, try it yourself, and then get feedback on when you tried it. It's a very powerful learning activity for that new person coming in. And great mentors can really extend that orientation program. The next one gets to the question that was asked earlier: how does a supervisor really observe all their faculty members? And part of the observation is just numbers that you can get from your LMS. If you have expectations, as we discussed earlier, for faculty participation, you can get those easily, track them week by week. It's almost no work on the part of the supervisor, unless people are slow and tardy and a conversation is in order. But the next thing is about quality. Takes more time. Somebody has to observe that classroom. So I want to talk just a minute about classroom observations. I'm going to show you an example of just the categories of a form, the references there, from a study that was done and published in the Journal of Asynchronous Learning. And there's an example in this article about the form that they use. Here's the 5 categories: course climate, instruction, interaction and discussion, facilitation, and so forth. And the next slide here, we're going to show you a breakdown of that third category about the discussion facilitation. So in this particular form, the observer rates the faculty member on these 4 topics on a 1 to 5 scale. They also ask students in their student end of term survey to use a similar set of criteria, so you get feedback from both students and the supervisor on these particular points. A really good rubric will have examples of a 1 and a 5 so that you can help triangulate in and get more reliability. But there's a lot of forms like this being used and adapted to online learning The key then is the question that was asked is, how often do you do this? And again, in my experience, it's typical for a new faculty member to be observed 2 or 3 times that first term that they teach to make sure that everything is going right, the expectations are clear, and that they're doing well. If you get them started off on the right foot, everything goes that much easier later on. So you set up your own schedule, what makes sense to you as an institution, but I would say more frequently for early people, and then as they get more veteran and they've performed well and you have confidence in them, you back off to maybe once a year. It's also true, though, that if you quit doing this, people kind of backslide and things happen, so it's important that you don't just abandon this after a person's taught a couple terms, but it's part of the ongoing process. And taking together the feedback from their timeliness of participation in a quality observation like this really gives good feedback to that person and gets them set up for success right from the beginning. And finally, the last piece of a good supervisory system, which should apply to any of us in our professional roles, is some kind of performance review, and typically it's done once a year. Here's some examples of the kind of data, again, the experience that I've had, where we would collect all of this data once a year, pull it all together in a report, sit down with the faculty member, and review the data, the feedback, and set goals for the coming year. So student satisfaction surveys are typically completed at the end of each class. You can accumulate that data over time and give the average for that particular person. And it's helpful to compare this against university averages or averages for that same course if multiple people teach that course. Retention rates, same thing. You can get within class retention rates, how many people started the class and finished the class. And again, the comparisons can be very helpful for similar types of classes or that same class across numerous faculty members. Student achievement is something we're going to talk about in the next seminar in a couple months about curriculum design and development. But if you design your curriculum, your courses appropriately, you can track student achievement of course outcomes and accumulate that data over time, which to me is the gold standard on what we're trying to accomplish. And we'll talk to you more about how to do that in our next webinar. The quality evaluation. So this person, in the fictitious example I put together here, was observed twice. Once in the first semester, the 01 term, and then again in the 03 term. So you got 2 summaries of the instrument that was used, whatever your institution uses as the observation form. The timeliness numbers, again, you can collect those and collate them and average them over time. And then I think it's always helpful to look at the course GPA, more so than the GPA, the grade distribution. You know, how many F's, how many B's, C's, B's, and A's. And you see interesting patterns, especially if you compare that across different faculty teaching the same course. A lot of this data is just summarized here, but behind this are the individual questions on a student satisfaction form, which can be very telling. So if you look at all of this data together, you get a good picture of a faculty member's performance. Especially if you can trend this over a year or two, you see clearly areas where a faculty member can maybe improve, opportunities for development, especially if you offer those or can send them to a conference. And the goals that you can set at this point, you follow up with the next year. In my experience, faculty members appreciate this kind of level of support. Some people shy away from saying supervising and managing other people, but I think it's a gift that supervisors give their people. I think it's a way to communicate in very real terms how much you value that employee and how much you're willing to invest in them so they get better. And I've met very, very few faculty members in my experience that don't want to get better and appreciate feedback and help in doing that. So, in wrapping this up, the final note that I would leave with you folks, and by the way, Wendy and I will stay on for the next half hour if people want to continue and we want to have some comments and questions. I'll be glad to stay and answer any questions that folks want to submit. I've observed a very powerful impact in these online universities and online programs where the faculty work together and actually become a community of scholars as they share best practice and as they try to help one another. online faculty members tend to have a pioneering kind of spirit about them. They're out there kind of doing new things on a new frontier. It's also a very public kind of place because the classrooms are open. You can record these classrooms and view them years later if you want to, because all the digital data is there. So they're more open, I think, and understand that their work is not private and hidden. And they tend to have a solitary life. And if you go to work every day from your home office, it can get kind of boring in some respects, and you don't have the interaction. So they value an opportunity to interact with a mentor or to lead a demonstration webinar like this or to participate in those. So these factors come together, and when you involve the faculty members in helping one another, they're very willing to share. They have great practices. They're trying new things in their classrooms. It's easy, in a sense, to set up that community, and they thrive in it. And they create this really kind of symbiotic relationship, which can be very healthy for them, but also results in a better student experience. So for those of you that are on the, we invite you to come to our Connect conference in Louisville. Here's some webinars that are upcoming. We will send each of you that participated today a copy of the slide, the presentation that was used if you want to refer back to it. And I've written a short white paper covering these same topics, and we'll be sending that to all of you here in the next week or so you can kind of refer back and think about this. I've appreciated your comments greatly. Thank you for participating today, and we hope to see you at a future webinar.
And if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and just type them in, and we can answer them.
Yeah, we'll stick around for a while if anybody has questions that you'd like to share, and I'll respond so you can keep your lines open.
So there's a question from Charlie. Will or can we get a recorded copy of the webinar, as I would love to share with a few key folks on my campus to confirm what I'm doing with faculty. Yes, in the next week we'll have a recorded copy of the webinar on our resources section of our website, which is www.learninghouse.com. It's a really big file, so we can't email it out. So if you'll check back next week, there'll be a recorded copy, and you can email the link out to the people on your campus.
So here's a question. Is there a copy of the faculty evaluation form available? The one that I referred to there, I listed the reference on the slides, so this is a published article in the journal. You can go find it. Actually, that journal has a theme, and there's probably a half a dozen examples of good observation forms that other universities are using there. And the training department here at the Learning House is actually in the process of developing a good overall form to use for faculty observations to get at the quality of instruction. So that'll be available here in the next few months. We'll probably share it for the first time at the Connect conference in July. So you can check back on our website, and when that's ready, it'll be available to anybody that wants to use it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we have a question from text. This year we started rolling out 3 grad programs and 1 undergrad RN to BSN online. The deans are trying to utilize full-time faculty as much as possible, but I don't feel some are always ready. Are you aware of any formal readiness assurance assessments or models, something like I've seen for students?
You know, that's a great question, Tex. I've seen some of those for students, too. They're pretty helpful to see if the student is really ready to kind of self-discipline and technology and so forth to do online. I don't know of another tool for faculty members other than kind of the same process you'd use to screen a new faculty member. You can interview people, you can share your expectations, you know, and say, here's the expectations we have for our online faculty. Here's kind of a demonstration of how our online class works. And but that's an interesting thing to work on. If you develop something along that line, I'd love to see it, or potentially our training department would like to work with you if you have some ideas about that, Tex. There may be, you know, some exercises or some examples of kind of self-survey we could go through that would help people know if they're really ready to teach online. Sometimes people just don't know what they're getting into. They've heard about it, but they haven't really experienced it. So to kind of walk them through an online class and kind of demo it could be very helpful. One of the nice things too about the orientation program I didn't mention is that you experience being a student in an online class. You teach the orientation on your LMS, so you get to know what it's like as a student, which is a really good way to kind of help them understand the student point of view too.
Oh, here's me. Diane has a question. What about a student's need to know set of responsibilities and expectations? Do you have that type of documentation to share?
Diane, we don't. There is a, as we mentioned earlier, there's a company, I'm blanking on the name of it right now, that has a standardized instrument that kind of determines student readiness for online learning. And I think if you email me, I'll try to find that example. It's probably in my files. Smarter Majors. There you go. Yep, that's the name of it. Thank you, Linda. Isn't it nice that we have people sharing an example of what I mentioned earlier? Yeah, so go to the Smarter Majors. That's more if a student is ready to do online learning. If you have particular expectations for student behavior in the classroom, like I mentioned for faculty behavior, each institution has to kind of set that for themselves, maybe even departments do, but you can have a good discussion with the faculty in your department or your institution about those. And oftentimes they'll show up in the student handbook. There's clearly expectations about plagiarism, about appropriate student behavior on message boards and protection of privacy and harassment and things like that. Those would all be good expectations to share. They're really not a whole lot different for online students than they are for campus-based students, but those are typically be found in the student handbook.
And we have another question from Jim. Do you find the success of implementation of online programs varies with the level of the program? For example, are there better results with graduate, undergraduate, or certificate career training programs?
Jim, in my experience, I don't know any difference. I've seen really great programs at all those levels, and I think the principles or things that I tried to kind of condense into this presentation today are important. Whether you're teaching a certificate program or a doctoral degree, I've worked with institutions of both types, and these principles are kind of universal. Good teaching is good teaching. Good online practices in terms of supervision and support for your faculty work. And so I don't see a difference in terms of successful implementation here, to be honest with you. So, Linda, question. We do an 8-week online instruction course in teaching online course design and pedagogy, but are developing an online teaching overview, 4-day online workshop to introduce the idea to faculty. That way they can gauge whether or not they would like to teach online and take the full training. That's a really nice idea. I mean, 4 days is still a big investment, as a workshop if it takes all day for 4 days in a row, but that's a great deal. You put together a workshop about online teaching in response to the question earlier that kind of gives you a taste and a feel for it. That's a great idea, I think. Thanks for sharing.
I just might have a question, but I don't know.
So Joanne and Quinn, are you at King College, and do you have a question? It looks like you're trying to answer a question on the phone, but if you would type it into the chat or the Q&A box, we can get your question. That's one of the limitations of the technology that I think is going to go away
Well, I
before
could
too long.
ask her.
We can try if we can get you on the line here, Joanne.
If she is.
Hello? She may have left, but
Okay.
hello? No.
Yeah, I'm trying, Joanne.
It looks like we still have quite a few attendees. If if you have questions or comments, fire away. This is kind of a good discussion. I wish we could do more of this where we get good ideas from the group as well.
Oh, here's the question. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, Julianne, there you are. We found you. It's a different chat room, but this is good.
Julian, we require a clinical practice session, e.g. a change project workout at a local hospital. What issues will an online faculty have?
Joanne, if I understand your question right, this is some kind of practicum or internship, or it could be a whole term length, or it could be a short assignment for your students. Again, in my experience, many of the programs where I've worked have had required internships or practicums. These are typically longer in length, where they would be like a full term. And the institution has an office of, placement office or field experience office that helps monitor and select and approve those internship sites, and lays out the responsibilities and the expectations for the supervisor locally. Again, oftentimes that's online training. I've been in institutions where we have students all over the country, in multiple sites simultaneously doing internships. And you need to set up the procedures to kind of monitor that and get feedback. There's a lot of legal issues, not a lot, but there's legal issues about the nature of the agreement and what the expectations are and student behavior at those places. Oftentimes, too, the classes it's offered that the students are in a class online about expectations and their behavior in the internship and where they turn in assignments for grades, in addition to when they go to the site and do the work at the site with the supervisor there. So it requires some kind of local supervisory responsibility. The online faculty member can coordinate that, and you can have an online class that supports it. I hope I answered your question. If not, feel free to come back.
And we have another question. Do you think that having faculty being accessible too often is a good thing, or should some limitations be set, meaning that online office hours via chat or webinar setting versus texting, phone and email access 24/7? How much is too much?
The students would tell you that there's never too much. I think in my experience with adult online learners, they highly value a faculty member who's responsive to them and gets back to them quickly. If they have a question, they're kind of stumped and they can't proceed. Their work schedules mean that they set aside like Tuesday night to work on classes, maybe Saturday morning, and they don't have any other time. So if they don't get the answer, the response they needed, they're tough. So they really appreciate faculty members who are responsive. I've seen faculty members that schedule kind of their availability around due dates. Like oftentimes in these courses, there's weekly work to be done, and assignments are due at midnight on a certain night. Actually, at one university where I worked, we moved that to Tuesday night. It found that many students wanted to work on the weekend, but they wanted some feedback from faculty, or they had questions of their faculty member that they could get some help on before they made that final submission. So if it was Sunday night, it's tough to get a faculty member on the weekends, but when we moved it to Tuesday night, they got better response from faculty. They could work on the weekend, send a question or an inquiry to their faculty member, get a response back on Monday, make the adjustments or whatever before they submitted their work on Tuesday night. So that's a good cycle. But our faculty then, would know that, hey, students are going to be working hard, deadline for stuff is Tuesday, so I'm pretty much reserving Monday to work on my classes, because they schedule their time too. And they can adapt and kind of fit in their students' schedules. But actually, there's another aspect to this. I've seen faculty on the discussion boards that try to respond to every student, every post. That's a bit much, I think, and it can be overwhelming. And you can lead to the expectation that you're always going to hear from the faculty members. In that case, I think other students may back off a little bit. So there is a kind of an appropriate level, I think, where you want to be responsive to your students, and probably at least once a week respond to every student's post throughout the week, but not every time. I think gets to be excessive. Yeah.
Tess has another question. We have a handful of faculty that insist on synchronous sessions, and we'd like to see mostly asynchronous instruction. Anyone else dealing with that or have school policies for that?
Yeah, this is something I've just kind of come across, Tex, although I have quite a bit of experience. One of the universities where I worked had a required synchronous session once a week in every class. It was just part of the online class, which you had what we called a seminar, which was scheduled for like 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. So I've seen it happen, but that was clearly a supplement to the regular online classroom. You wouldn't ignore the discussion board or replace the discussion board with those synchronous webinars. They were there to enhance. What we found in that university was that about a third of the students really appreciated the synchronous seminars. They attended every one and were highly engaged. Another third could care less and didn't like them and didn't value them. They weren't helpful. And then there was a third that found them sometimes helpful, sometimes not. They were back and forth. In that situation, we had students, if they didn't attend the seminar, they could do an alternative assignment to kind of make up for it. And I know a lot of those students couldn't attend the actual seminar because of their schedules, but they could record it and see it afterwards and go through it. So I think synchronous events are a really important tool that can be very valuable for certain kinds of learning outcomes, and especially for certain types of students. They value that chance to interact with other students like we're doing today here and with their faculty members. But I would really be skeptical of just replacing and saying that I did a synchronous session. In fact, I visited a school last week, a potential partner, and they said we actually video capture our faculty members in the classroom, and we make it available for our online students to attend that class vicariously. And so they were saying we're doing online learning, but basically what it was giving remote students access to the lecture or the scheduled classroom on campus at the same time as all the campus students. They mixed them together. That's okay and that's nice, but they miss the power of online learning when they do that. Because part of the power that you do online that you can't do in a classroom is the day-by-day, week-by-week discussion board and interaction and a one-on-one interaction you just can't do in a face-to-face. That's why blended learning really has so much potential if you can do both.
And Tess was saying, right, we don't always want to replicate the classroom.
No, not if it's a replacement. I mean, you lose the power of the discussion board and the other feedback that happens in an online classroom. Anybody else want to respond to text? And if anybody has a comment, we'll be glad to share it if you have an idea about how you handle synchronous sessions in your classes, whether you promote them or kind of deter them from happening. We still have quite a few folks here that are listed as attending, about 19 folks, so feel free if you have questions. So if you can think of something that you want to comment on, your comments are as helpful and appropriate as questions too.